Welcome to Citizen Portal, the federal edition, your go-to source for everything happening in federal politics. Let's dive in and keep you connected to what matters most on the national stage. Okay, so imagine this, right? You're facing a potential prison sentence, but the length of that sentence feels like it's totally up to chance, especially if you've, been in trouble with the law before.
Yeah.
Well, that's kind of the reality the U.S. Sentencing Commission is trying to tackle right now. And we're going deep into their latest hearing to help you get what's at stake here.
It was a pretty fascinating hearing, actually. Judges, lawyers, probation officers, even folks who've been directly affected by these laws, they all showed up to give their 2 cents. Really shows you just how complex this whole thing is.
Yeah, for sure. So are you ready to untangle some legal mumbo-jumbo with us?
Always up for a challenge.
Awesome. So today we're diving into proposed changes to these federal sentencing guidelines, focusing on gun crimes and robbery in particular. By the end of this deep dive, you'll be able to decide for yourself if these changes are going to make things fair or if they're just, moving the goalposts.
Right, because one of the biggest hot-button issues is this career offender guideline. It's a real doozy.
Okay, break that down for me. What's the deal with this career offender thing?
Well, right now, it can mean way longer sentences. Even if your past crimes were pretty minor, it's all based on those past convictions, even if they happened ages ago.
So like say someone did sometime years back for, I don't know, a low-level drug offense, and now they're facing a sentence for a minor theft like shoplifting or something. Is that what you mean?
Exactly. That old conviction could get them slapped with the career offender label. Boom. Much harsher sentence. And the commission, they're trying to revamp this whole thing. They want to focus more on the details of your past crimes instead of just lumping everything together.
So rather than just saying, oh, you stole something before, so you're automatically a career criminal, they're actually going to look at the specifics.
Yeah, like let's say 2 people both stole a car, but one of them used force, the other one didn't. Under the old rules, they could both end up as career offenders.
Wow.
Right. The new rules are trying to change that, make it more about what you actually did.
Okay, that sounds like a step in the right direction, right? But I bet there's a catch, isn't there?
Well, there are always wrinkles, right? Even though the goal is to make things fairer, this new approach might actually make sentencing even more complicated for judges.
How so?
Think about it. Trying to sort through old convictions from all over the place with different laws in different states, it's a mess. Plus, some defense attorneys are worried that even with these changes, folks from marginalized communities who are already overrepresented in the system,
Right.
they could still end up getting the short end of the stick.
That makes sense. It's a valid concern. Makes you wonder if simplifying the whole sentencing system altogether might be the way to go. It feels like there are so many loopholes and legal detours that it's confusing even for the experts,
Well, the commission, they are aiming for a more streamlined system, that's true. They want to move away from all those departures, those exceptions to the rules, and focus more on variances.
Okay, back up a sec. Departures versus variances. What's the difference?
So departures, those are like specific exceptions written into the guidelines. But variances, those give judges more wiggle room to consider someone's unique situation.
But wouldn't getting rid of those departures mean judges have less power to make sure the sentence is actually fair?
That's exactly what some defense attorneys are worried about. They think streamlining could lead to harsher sentences for some folks. But here's a twist. Probation officers, the people who actually see how these sentences play out in people's lives,
Yeah.
they're actually in favor of simplifying things.
Really? Why is that? It seems counterintuitive.
Well, probation officers, they're saying judges are already using variances more often than departures anyway, so the current system feels kind of redundant to them,
So they're saying the guidelines should match what's happening in reality.
Exactly. It's a classic debate, though, right? Do you streamline for efficiency or keep things flexible for those individual cases? And speaking of tricky situations, this hearing also got into the whole issue of machine gun conversion devices, or MCDs. Have you heard about these things?
I've heard of them, those tiny gadgets that can turn a regular rifle into an automatic weapon in like seconds.
Yep, those are the ones. And they're becoming more and more common, which is why the commission is trying to figure out how to address them in the sentencing guidelines.
Yeah, it's a whole other can of worms, isn't it? So what are they thinking of doing? Throwing the book at anyone caught with one of these MCDs?
Well, the Department of Justice, they're pushing for some pretty strict penalties, that's for sure. They're basically arguing that if you have one, you're either going to use it to convert a gun or sell it to someone who will. So in their eyes, just possessing an MCD means you're up to no good.
Whoa, that's pretty harsh, isn't it? I mean, I get that they're dangerous, but...
Right, but there's another side to this. Public defender Vivian Marrero, she's got a lot of experience with MCD cases, and she's saying, hold on a second, just making the penalties harsher isn't going to solve the problem of gun violence. Plus, it could really hurt people who have these devices but don't actually intend to use them for anything bad.
I'm listening. Give me an example.
So she talked about a client who had been robbed at gunpoint. Understandably terrified, he went and bought a gun off the street for self-defense, didn't even realize the gun had an MCD attached to it.
Oh, wow.
Under these proposed changes, he could face a much tougher sentence than someone who actually used an MCD in a crime, even though his only intention was to protect himself. It really shows you how complicated this all is.
It does. It makes you wonder if sometimes these rules just create more problems than they solve.
Right. It's a balancing act. You want to keep people safe, but you also want to make sure the punishment fits the crime, you know?
Absolutely. And speaking of trying to find that balance, this whole hearing also got into the debate over physical restraint during a robbery. It might sound straightforward, but it's actually pretty tricky.
You think you know what physical restraint means, right? Like tying someone up. But it's not that simple.
So what's the hang-up?
The question is, does it only count if someone's physically tied up? Or does any kind of threat that stops them from moving, like pointing a gun at them, count as physical restraint too?
So, like, is it worse to be tied up or to have a gun pointed at your head? Man, that's a tough one.
Yeah, and right now it depends on which federal court you're in. Some courts only apply the physical restraint enhancement if there's actual physical contact. Others say any threat that restricts movement is enough, so it's all over the place.
So someone could get a totally different sentence for basically the same crime depending on where it happened.
Exactly. And during the hearing, they had people arguing both sides. This defense attorney, Michael Carter, he'd actually been robbed at gunpoint himself, and he spoke really powerfully about how being physically touched during a robbery adds a whole other level of terror and trauma.
I can imagine.
He wants them to stick with the stricter interpretation, only applying the enhancement if there is actual physical contact. Makes you think about what truly makes a crime more severe, right?
For sure. So what are they going to do about it? Just pick a definition and go with it?
Well, they're considering a few options. One would be to say, yep, gunpoint immobilization counts as physical restraint. Another would be to stick with requiring actual physical contact. And then there's a third option, which would create different levels of enhancement depending on how someone was restrained.
So trying to find some middle ground.
Yeah, acknowledging that all types of restraint are serious, but some are more severe than others. It's about trying to make sure the punishment fits the specific crime. And trust me, that's just the tip of the iceberg. There's a whole lot more they're trying to sort out, like how firearms are categorized and whether some of these criminal history enhancements are being applied fairly in the first place.
So it sounds like the commission is trying to find that balance, keeping people safe, but also being fair.
Definitely. And this whole idea of intent, knowing what someone's planning to do, that actually came up in another part of the hearing, too, when they were talking about firearm offenses in general. They're thinking about adding something called a mens rea requirement to some of the sentencing enhancements.
Okay, gotta be honest. Legal jargon isn't my strong suit. What in the world is mens rea?
It's basically about your state of mind when you commit a crime. Did you do it on purpose, knowingly, or were you just reckless? So this proposed change would mean the government would have to prove that someone knew a firearm was stolen or that the serial number had been messed with before they could get hit with a tougher sentence.
So if I'm understanding this right, if someone had a stolen gun, but they had no idea it was stolen, they shouldn't be punished as harshly as someone who knew they were doing something wrong.
Exactly. Makes sense, right? And a lot of defense attorneys and these legal groups, they're all for it. They think adding this mens rea thing would lead to more sentences that actually reflect what the person did and meant to do. But of course, the Department of Justice, they're not so thrilled about it.
Why not? Wouldn't they want to be sure someone knew they were doing something wrong?
Well, their big concern is proving that someone knew something. Especially when it comes to stolen guns or messed up serial numbers, it can be really tough to prove what someone knew or didn't know. Imagine a situation where cops find someone with a stolen gun. How do you prove for sure that they knew it was stolen?
Yeah, I could see how that would be tricky. So what are they going to do? Just scrap the whole mens rea thing?
Well, not necessarily. They came up with a kind of compromise, something called a rebuttable presumption.
Okay, now you're just using big words to confuse me.
No, it's simpler than it sounds. Basically, it means instead of the government having to prove the person knew the gun was stolen, the person would have to prove that they didn't know. So it kind of flips things around.
Interesting. So it's like a middle ground, trying to balance the need for proof with the reality that sometimes it's hard to get that proof.
Exactly.
Now, before we move on, got to ask about something that always throws me for a loop. Circuit splits. I know they can really shake things up in the legal world, but I'm still not quite sure what they are.
Yeah, circuit splits, they can be a bit of a headache. Basically, it's when different federal courts interpret the same law in different ways.
So, like, depending on where you live, you could get a totally different sentence for the same crime.
Yep, that's the problem, and that's why the commission is always trying to smooth things out, make sure things are applied consistently across the country. And in this hearing, they were tackling two big circuit splits. One was about physical restraint during a robbery, which we touched on before. And the other one was about something called an intervening arrest.
All right, we already talked about the whole gunpoint thing. Can we quickly talk about that other circuit split you mentioned, the one about intervening arrest? What's the deal with that one?
This might sound like a technicality, but it can really affect someone's sentence. It's all about how their criminal history is calculated. So the question is, what exactly counts as an intervening arrest? Some courts say it has to be a full-blown arrest, charges filed, the whole 9 yards. Other courts say even just being briefly detained by the police counts.
Hold on. So if you get pulled over for a busted taillight and you have a prior conviction, that could count against you in some places.
Yep, crazy, right? And it could mean a longer sentence if you get in trouble again later on. So the commission, they're trying to clear things up. They want to define an intervening arrest as a former custodial arrest. So like you're actually taken into custody. And they're also adding some exceptions like routine traffic stops where you just get a ticket. Those wouldn't count.
That's good. Sounds like they're trying to make things a bit more clear-cut. But I bet there are still some gray areas, right? Nothing's ever that simple.
You're telling me? The probation officers advisory group, they pointed out that the proposed definition would still be a bit fuzzy, especially in situations where someone's held for questioning but not technically arrested. They think maybe it's better to look at when someone goes to court for the first time, when they're officially told what they're being charged with. That might be a clearer sign of an intervening event.
It makes you realize that even when they try to simplify things, it's never as easy as it seems.
Oh, for sure. The law is rarely black and white. There are always those edge cases, those weird situations that don't quite fit the mold. It's a constant challenge.
All right, we've been through a lot over these past two parts. Lots of talk about gun crimes and robbery, those sentencing guidelines, all that.
Yeah, we've really gotten into the weeds, haven't we? Mens rea, circuit splits, those machine gun conversion devices. It's been a whirlwind.
It has. But it's important to remember that we're not just talking about some legal mumbo-jumbo here, right? This stuff has a real impact on people's lives, people who are caught up in the justice system.
Absolutely. And one thing that really hit home for me during these hearings was the power of personal stories. Hearing from people directly, people who've been through it themselves, it just adds a whole other layer to the discussion.
Yeah, for sure. I remember that guy, Stephen Russell, who talked about his experience in the system. It was really powerful stuff.
Oh yeah, his story was incredible. He spoke about how tough it is to get back on your feet after serving time, trying to rebuild your life. He really emphasized the need for second chances, for rehabilitation, helping people get back on track.
It felt like he was speaking for so many people who've been through the same thing. He talked about how going to prison actually gave him the time and space to reflect on his past, to make positive changes in his life.
Yeah, and now he's using his experience to help others. He started a nonprofit to educate young people and their families about the law, trying to break that cycle of incarceration.
It's pretty inspiring, right? I mean, after everything he went through, he's committed to making a difference.
It really shows you that even though someone's made mistakes, it doesn't mean they can't turn things around. There's always hope for growth and change.
And then there was Kyle Waldron, the guy who talked about getting caught selling those MCDs. His story really highlighted how these blanket sentencing enhancements can backfire sometimes.
Yeah, he wasn't involved in any violence or anything, but he was facing years behind bars, potentially getting hit with the same kind of sentence as someone who'd done something way worse.
It's tough, right? Trying to find that balance between protecting the public and making sure the punishment fits the person and the crime.
It is, and Kyle's story really brought that home. It made you think about whether the focus should always be just on the offense itself or whether the person's intentions and circumstances should matter too.
It's a big question. So, what's the big takeaway? What are we left with?
Well, it's clear that the commission has a really tough job. They're juggling all these competing priorities. They want to keep the public safe, but they also want to make sure sentencing is fair and consistent, and they want to take each individual situation into account. And they've got to sort through all these legal gray areas, too, like those circuit splits we talked about, where different courts are interpreting the same laws in different ways.
Yeah, it's a mess.
But the good thing is they seem to be really committed to getting input from all sides. Judges, lawyers, probation officers, victims, and people who've actually been through the system. It shows they're taking this seriously.
I think that's important, right? To have those open conversations and try to find solutions that everyone can at least understand, even if they don't agree with them.
Exactly. This hearing gave us a glimpse into how they're trying to make the sentencing system better, more fair, and more effective. It's a work in progress, but it's good to see that they're trying.
And that's a wrap for this deep dive into the U.S. Sentencing Commission hearing. We hope this gave you a better understanding of this complex world of sentencing guidelines and how these proposed changes could have a ripple effect throughout the justice system.
We always encourage you to dig deeper, do your own research, look into the U.S. Sentencing Commission, see what they're up to, check out the proposed changes, form your own opinions. It's important stuff.
Absolutely. Because at the end of the day, these decisions impact real people's lives. They shape how our justice system acts, how we hold people accountable, and how we give them a chance to turn their lives around. So stay informed, stay engaged, and we'll catch you next time on the Citizen Portal podcast. Thanks for tuning in to Citizen Portal. We hope you feel more informed and ready to engage with the issues shaping our community. Be sure to subscribe so you never miss an update, and visit us at citizenportal.ai for more insights on how local politics are impacting you. Until then, stay engaged, stay informed, and remember, your voice matters.